Okay, you choose. Choose one. Okay.
What advice would you give your daughter, son in regards to romantic relationships?
Obviously, my son, it would be probably a bit difficult because I'm not a man, you know.
Okay.
So I think if I had a daughter, it would be about just realizing that not every man that gives you attention actually likes you. You know, it's quite something in the teenage year. You think somebody gives you attention, you're like, oh, they must really like me, and it's just not the case. You know, I think I would instill this quite simply. Obviously, I would go more in depth and maybe elaborate depending on her age. You know, because obviously if you're reaching 16, 17, we can go a bit more in depth when it comes to the conversation.
16, 17?
Yeah. Okay, maybe.
That's a bit late.
Well, for me, I was a bit late. Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So I guess, yeah. But I had talks with my mom when I was 12, I guess, yeah. But I don't know. I think she nurtured a little bit of a. Yeah, my mom was quite free with things. So I'm not sure if she did she did the right thing. Like, she never made me feel like I had to be like ashamed of my sexuality or But I think I would teach my daughter like just the mere fact that every man that gives you attention necessarily likes you, and you should just like take your time and just to really figure out if you align with someone, or if you like that person, if you feel safe with that person. That's the most important thing, I guess. And a boy, what would I tell him about romantic relationships? It'd probably be a conversation about consent. And obviously also to respect your body. And I think sometimes it's like, maybe some people would say it's for men.
Is there a way to have that conversation that's cool enough to engage an actual young person? Because I think my parents said that to me and I didn't understand what the hell
respect your body?
Yeah, it sounded like you're trying to get me not to have fun, but like obviously now as an adult I'm like, yeah, please.
Just show pictures of STDs.
Wow. I don't think that works either.
Probably not, I don't know.
Because in the conversation of STDs is this idea of an immediate cure. So not all of them, but there is some sort of prevention, managing way of doing it. So it doesn't give it as not as big a deterrent as people think. It also doesn't identify pleasure in any of those things, and that's a really important thing. I think if we taught young people pleasure, they would learn to honor it in a way because it's not pleasurable more than you would if you just scare them with, you can have a baby in STDs. I don't think that's a deterrent. I think when you give them self-interest and say, if you enjoy this, then you can repeat it, they'll be more intentioned about what enjoyment looks like than they would be about what fear feels like. I think people are driven more by passion than they are fear.
So basically you would teach them about pleasure?
Yeah, starting with themselves and how to pleasure others. And if you're going to engage in this, it should feel good. It shouldn't just happen because you're curious and you don't have answers and you want to try the thing that everyone else is doing. It's an exercise in pleasure. And then it's like, if I told you something tastes good, you're going to try it more than you are this idea of like, I'm tasting it because it's like, it's too hot. Like, don't touch it, it's too hot, doesn't deter you.
So you'd be like, touch it?
No, I would say, if you want this brownie, this is what the best brownie in the world should look like. And you would look at it and be like, it doesn't look like that, so it's not worth my time because it's not worth the actual trying this brownie. If I just say like, don't have brownies because it's too hot and it's bad for you because of sugar, you can be like, I love this brownie. But if I tell you what the best brownie should look and smell like, if it doesn't look and smell like that, your senses will go off and be like, it ain't worth it. I'll wait for the best brownie. I know where to get them from. And also you can communicate to somebody how to make you the best brownie. I appreciate the metaphor of brownie into sex is different, but we never talk about what is good for you, the reasons to do it and the context that you should do it in, and be careful of that to make sure that it's actually a pleasurable experience. We just say no and don't because it's scary, because of AIDS and because of STDs.
Positive reinforcement, basically.
It's more than positive reinforcement. It's like appealing to the self-interest of the young person rather than scaring them into not doing something. Because the messaging of sex being cool or interesting or try it is too big.
Yeah, to just be like, don't do it.
Yeah, like everyone's like, yeah, do it. Oh, I just did it with Jane last week. I lost my virginity. You're a virgin? Yeah. And it's just like, well, the first thing is someone that comes to you and says like, oh, I lost my virginity. Is like, did you enjoy it? Yeah, no, it it's like, it's kind of cool and it hurt a little bit, but like, when I bled and like, that's not...
And did you, what would you teach your daughter about romantic relationships?
How
would you do it?
I wouldn't necessarily make a big distinction between the two things. I would tell them more about, I'll teach them the same values. What I'll make them aware of is how they will experience other people in that engagement. So I think my son being more concerned with consent from gaining it than my daughter commanding it. Mm-hmm. And I think, I'm not saying that they wouldn't do in the inverse, but I think as a young black boy, how you're perceived and what you participate in is really important. And I think even him understanding the concept of pleasure, I was never taught pleasure as a man. It was...
demonized a lot.
It was demonized, but also it was like sex is about the orgasm. Mm-hmm. And it's a goal rather than an experience. So if it's a goal, then as long as I ejaculate, job's done. Mm-hmm. And by the way, the ejaculation and the orgasm are separate. So then it's like, I didn't even know that. So I'm just like, if I ejaculate, I've won. That's my orgasm. I ejaculate, job done, I go to sleep. Mm-hmm. But the idea of pleasure is sometimes you might not even ejaculate, but it feels good. Mm-hmm. Like it's like a check-in, like a physical check-in with someone. That's a really dope thing to experience without the goal of having to ejaculate. And
therefore, it's also more about the chemistry you have with the other person. Yeah, and that's where I guess the teaching comes in about the cookie. Yeah. That it's more about the chemistry and how you feel about the person rather than the end goal of the orgasm. This is where the pleasure actually comes from.
Yeah. Okay, you wait for it to be good. Yes. Than to just wait for it to happen.
Because if that's the only way it's gonna be good if you have that chemistry, really and truly. Otherwise it's just gonna be, and that's what happens a lot. You're just chasing something all the time because you haven't made the time to have that connection.
Yeah. If you haven't had one of those relationships where kissing was just so good and it was just about kissing, just for like a period of time, and the kissing part was explosive for you, it just turned you on. Like if you haven't had those different ways of engaging with someone and that bringing you to life, you haven't had the thing yet. Like I feel like the other things can heighten the actual sex, and for the sex to be good, the other things are just like. It's just like you're turning hobs on a stove. Like you turn it all on, then you cook. Yeah. And I think so many people are just into cooking, just like making stuff and just putting their dick in people and having sex, and then just like they're exchanging that for the intimacy, the magic, and the spark. So they never really get it, but having the physical penetrative sex is basically the thing, and it's their shortcut into some sort of connection. Whereas like pleasure is different. Like connection, intimacy, and pleasure is different. It can look in different ways, and I think once you get into that space, it's a much better experience. That's what I'll be teaching them when that conversation comes. Because I think there's a biological explanation, then there is a pleasure conversation, and then there is like intimacy with somebody else is different. The pleasure with yourself is one phase, but when you're engaging other people is another phase. It's a whole different type of experience.
It's an interesting conversation to have with a teenager or, a young adult. Not a teenager is not a young adult, but,
Well, like, I think you have to start it in a different way really early. I don't know if you can get away with holding that conversation to late teens anyway. I think that's just impossible at this era. Like, it's being introduced to your children by the people that they're around really from secondary school onwards, if not before. Like, someone may mention it when you're 10, but you may not understand. By the time you're like 12, 13, you're being introduced to it. People start having this idea of I got a girlfriend, and then people are like, oh, have you done this yet? You're surrounded by people who are 15, 16.
You need to get 17, there before the other people get there. It's true.
Well, you need to be close enough to have the conversation when it's introduced to them so that they come to you with it rather than feel like they can't and they have to figure it out on their own. But it's a hypersensitive thing. People hate the idea of sexualizing young people, and of course we don't from an adult point of view, but they're having those types of conversations amongst themselves with their age mates, so you can't stop that. That's just happening. So are they ready for that, or at least is the door open for them to come and talk to you about it?
That's that's scary, because sex is such a important part of your life, if not actually almost the important part. Not sex per se, but your sexuality is a very big part of adult life. And I think it's so crazy how most households. I mean, I wouldn't say I came from a household like that. I mean, mom-wise, she was quite open with me. But I'm not saying she did the right thing, but at least there was a conversation. But to think that so many of us grew up never having that conversation at all because it's something that's derogatory, you say, that's just crazy. How did we, I mean, and it kind of shows, and I'm happy that we are all, you know, I'm happy for social media even, and that we're all having these conversations now. But thinking about before, like, probably like 2 out of 10 people had the actual conversation with their parents. And like I said, it kind of shows on how we interact with each other. But yeah, that's it. This one is unnecessary. I think we talked about this before. Yeah, it was just more about childhood trauma, and I think we went through that. Yeah. No, another one.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, thank you so much. I actually learned a lot today.
Good. That was fun. I enjoyed that. That was like, again, some of the questions are simple by nature, but then having to actually find words for it and committing to it, like, makes you really aware of like some of the answers. So even for me, I'm thinking, I haven't really thought about things, but you brought it to the front of mind. So it's a great group of questions.